told your friend you're not okay.
No one could have predicted that the casual trip in Trip EP.2 would turn into one of those moments that would have millions of viewers talking for days. Since the morning, the atmosphere of the episode had been calm, a soft air, casual banter, an unadulterated warmth between the members. However, that calmness slowly changed as soon as Jungkook stepped into the small kitchen area set up for cooking. At first glance, the activity seemed simple, perhaps even boring, just a small challenge to fill the time. But as Jungkook rolled up his sleeves, tied his apron around his waist, and stared at the ingredients neatly arranged on the table, something indescribable began to be felt. There was a shift in aura, a sudden seriousness in his expression, yet still mysterious, as if he were hiding a skill he had never fully revealed. It was as if a secret switch had been activated as he stared at the empty frying pan. The camera immediately captured the shift in atmosphere. There was no dramatic music, no cheers, but a slight tension crept in as Jungkook picked up the knife and wielded it not like a novice, but like someone who already knew exactly what he wanted to do. Jin, who was closest to him at the time, could only stand still. Normally, Jin was the most vocal when it came to food. His comments were quick, perceptive, humorous, and sometimes even too honest. But this time, his mouth was tightly shut, as if the words had suddenly vanished. His expression was crystal clear, a mix of curiosity, confusion, and a hint of disbelief. The way Jungkook chopped the ingredients, the way he sprinkled the seasonings without hesitation, it was all too neat, too fast, too expert for someone who often joked that he only cooked simple things. There wasn't a single nervous movement. His movements were steady, measured, and confident. It was as if he'd been waiting for this moment to show something he'd never shown off, even to the oldest members. When he turned the pan, the first aroma that emerged immediately filled the room, causing the other members to start peering curiously from a distance. It was as if the aroma was beckoning them closer. Jin raised his eyebrows, trying to read the situation, but all he saw was Jungkook, who seemed increasingly lost in his own world of cooking. Every stir had a rhythm, every movement had a purpose. Several times Jin wanted to say something like, "Magne, are you sure?" Or, "Who did you learn from?" But not a single word came out. He could only hold the spatula, unsure of what to do. Even his own hands seemed to tremble slightly, not out of fear, but out of surprise that Jungkook could be so skilled. The moment intensified when Jungkook tasted the broth with a confident expression, then gave a small nod of approval to himself. Jin swallowed hard, as if he were watching someone transform into a more mature, and more expert version of themselves in a matter of minutes. As the wok emitted a stronger aroma, the other members began to gather, their faces filled with unconcealed curiosity. Everyone stood frozen, staring at every detail of Jungkook's hand movements, as if afraid to blink, not wanting to miss a single second of this rare moment. Top KPOP's camera, usually known for its dramatic timing, suddenly captured a close-up of Jin's face. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parted for a split second, his expression exactly like someone who had just realized they had misjudged Jungkook's abilities all along. Beneath his playful expression, there was a sense of awe he couldn't hide. A sense of awe slowly drowned out all the comments he usually made. The tension gave way to a silence of anticipation as Jungkook began arranging the food on the plate. His movements were slow but steady, like a professional chef accustomed to performing in major competitions. The plate was placed in the center of the table, so neatly presented that it looked like it wasn't a spontaneous dish, but a work of art. Jin stared at it for a long time, as if he were gazing at something the joking Magne shouldn't have created. When Jungkook quietly said, "Hyung, try this," Jin fell silent even longer. No one knew what he was thinking. There was no witty comment, no excited reaction, none of his trademark quips. Just a look of shock and awe that he himself didn't know how to express. Meanwhile, the silence that followed after Jin tasted Jungkook's cooking wasn't just any silence. It was a silence that made the entire room stop breathing. The camera even zoomed in slowly on Jin's face, as if the world needed to see clearly the moment when the notoriously talkative Hyung completely lost the ability to speak. The other members standing around the table began to exchange glances, unsure whether to wait for Jin to react or grab their spoons and try it themselves. But none of them dared to take the lead. Jin remained rooted to the spot, and his reaction would determine whether Jungkook's cooking was safe, surprising, or simply beyond belief. Jungkook stood a few steps away from Jin, his body leaning slightly forward, his expression a mix of nervousness and confidence. He stared at his oldest Hyung with hopeful eyes, yet still tried to appear relaxed. But the slight movement of his fingers, which were clasped together beneath his apron, revealed that he was actually tensely awaiting an answer. Time seemed to pass in slow motion, as if the seconds were being forced to slow down just to allow everyone to witness this rare moment longer. Finally, Jin let out a long breath, a breath that seemed to release all the feelings he'd been holding in since he'd seen Jungkook enter the kitchen. He looked at the plate again, then at Jungkook, then back at the plate. And when he opened his mouth, the first words that came out weren't criticism, weren't praise, weren't a witty comment, but a sentence that silenced the room for the second time. "Since when can you cook like this?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper, not wanting to be heard too loudly because he wasn't sure what he was feeling. The best part was, Jin's expression was completely sincere. There was no acting, no drama. He was genuinely surprised. It was an honest confession from someone who had always considered himself the most knowledgeable about food. Jungkook smiled, a small smile that instantly warmed the atmosphere in the room. "I was just trying, Hyung," he replied, as humble as ever. But no one believed his answer. J-Hope immediately laughed softly, resting a hand on Jimin's shoulder, saying, "Hey, if this is just a test, what if he meant it?" RM, standing at the back, began to approach, tilting his head as if checking to see if the dish was real. Suga, notoriously difficult to show surprise, even raised his eyebrows slightly, a small gesture that, to the members, meant a lot. Jin finally put down his spoon very slowly, as if he was afraid to ruin the miracle that had just occurred. He stared at Jungkook for a long moment, before finally saying, half-jokingly but still awe-inspiringly, "If you keep cooking like this, my position as BTS's official chef will be in jeopardy." Everyone laughed, but it felt different. There was pride, surprise, and a warmth that was hard to describe. Once the other members finally tasted the dish, the atmosphere changed completely. Suddenly, the room was filled with noise. Laughter erupted, comments poured in, and Jungkook was bombarded with praise from all directions. Jimin immediately patted Jungkook's shoulder and shook his head in disbelief. "You've been hiding this from us all this time?" RM even bent down to the table and smelled the food with a look of amazement. "Wow, this is serious. This is no joke." J-Hope jumped slightly, holding his cheek, as if to make sure this wasn't a dream. Meanwhile, the usually sparing Suga simply said, "It's delicious." That one word from him was already a huge compliment. But what was most interesting was the way Jin looked at Jungkook after it was all over. There was something different in his eyes. Not a huge difference, but enough to be noticeable. A mix of pride, and perhaps a hint of defeat. It was as if he'd just realized that their golden magne had not only improved in vocals, dance, and performance, but also in little things they never expected, like cooking. There was a certain warmth in the way Jin gently patted Jungkook's shoulder with a small smile. "Okay, I have to be more careful from now on. This magne is starting to take over all the roles." Jungkook let out a big laugh, a laugh that livened up the atmosphere. And from there, the episode resumed with a much livelier vibe than before. The members began asking Jungkook to cook other dishes, joking that they wanted to open a restaurant specifically for BTS Trip. Jin joined in the teasing, saying he would be the restaurant manager and put Jungkook in charge of the main kitchen. Jungkook just shook his head and covered his face in embarrassment, but he clearly enjoyed the attention.